If you think an ancient $100,000 Swiss timepiece is just a fancy watch, you've clearly never had your life completely ruined by a ridiculously attractive man who measures his pulse in gear rotations. The heavy oak doors of the Manhattan workshop locked automatically, sealing out the damp city smog with the quiet click of a vault. Inside, the temperature was fixed at 67 degrees, the hum of filtered air purifiers was constant, and every single surface was so sterile you could perform open-heart surgery on the workbench. It was a fortress built entirely out of brushed steel, rose gold, and pure isolation. Min-jun stood at his main assembly table, 6'4" of solid muscle, tailored dark trousers, and a black silk shirt rolled up to his forearms. A sleeve of dark dragon and floral tattoos coiled around his right arm, disappearing under his watch strap. A custom double tourbillon piece he had built with his own hands. At 26, Min-jun was a complete mystery to the high-end horology world. The public knew him as a reclusive billionaire heir with deep roots in Seoul's underground shipping syndicates. But in this quiet room, he was simply the master of time. He didn't speak unless he was forced to, he didn't deal with clients, and he certainly didn't let anyone touch his tools. His rule was absolute. Time was clean, predictable, and devoid of messy human emotion. Then the side door's brass handle jiggled, the secondary security tumbler clicked, and Nia walked in carrying a cold iced coffee, looking like she owned the joint. Nia was 22, possessed glowing deep brown skin, wide observant eyes, and a mass of dark curls tied loosely on top of her head. She wore an oversized vintage bomber jacket over a crop top, high-waisted denim, and dirty sneakers that had no business being anywhere near a clean room environment. She was a self-taught mechanical prodigy who had spent her teens rebuilding vintage pocket watches in her uncle's garage in Brooklyn before landing an internship at the estate archive upstairs. "You're late," Min-jun grunted without looking up from his ocular loupe. His sharp Korean jawline set in its usual permanent frown. "I wasn't late. The train was stuck, and honestly, your security keypads have terrible tactile feedback," Nia said, setting her dripping plastic cup directly onto a leather-bound manual. Min-jun moved like a strike of lightning. His massive hand shot out, catching her wrist before the cup settled. His grip firm but completely respectful. Up close, his dark eyes held a ridiculous amount of intensity, his sharp features framed by messy dark hair that hung slightly in his face. "Do not put liquid near the documentation." Nia didn't flinch. She just smirked, leaning in slightly until she was well within his personal bubble. "You know, for a guy who charges $500,000 to fix a clock, you're surprisingly jumpy, boss." "I am not jumpy. I value order. You value sitting in the dark, glaring at springs like they owe you money." Min-jun released her wrist, returning to his loop. "The Pendleton Grand Complication is on the center pedestal. It has 34 complications, 3 separate escapements, and hasn't ticked since 1892. You are here to catalog the brass casing. Do not touch the interior movement." Yeah. Touch nothing. Breathe lightly. Don't exist too loudly," Nia muttered, strolling over to the glass display case in the center of the workshop. The pendulum clock inside was an absolute beast of 19th century engineering. It stood 6 feet tall, housed in a polished obsidian frame, featuring a double-barrel planetary gear system that had stumped every master watchmaker in Europe for over a century. Min-jun had spent 3 years calculating the mathematical alignment of its mainspring, trying to unlock the hidden gear train tucked deep behind the central dial. It was his obsession, his unsolved puzzle. Nia tilted her head, peering through the glass. Her sharp eyes scanned the exposed gears, tracing the mechanical path down to the small, offset brass lever near the escapement assembly. "The pitch on that third drive wheel is wrong," she said casually. Min-jun didn't even stop his tweezers from adjusting a microscopic hairspring on his own desk. "It is a differential gear setup designed by Abraham Louis Breguet's apprentice. The pitch is intentional." "It's not intentional. It's jammed," she replied, pulling a pair of thin brass tweezers out of her jacket pocket. Tools she definitely wasn't supposed to bring inside. Someone forced the winding stem in 1895 and sheared the second tooth on the reverse click.
Min-jun paused.
He slowly removed his eyepiece, setting it down on his velvet tray with a light click. He turned his massive frame toward her, crossing his arms over his broad chest. The dragon tattoo stretched across his forearm as his biceps flexed. I have spent 400 hours analyzing that movement with X-ray topography. The second tooth is intact. The tooth is intact, but the pivot arbor underneath is bent 3 degrees to the left, she said, popping open the side glass panel before he could even process what she was doing. Step away from the casing, he commanded, his deep voice dropping an octave, echoing through the quiet workshop with sudden authority. Relax, big boy. I'm not going to break your shiny toy, Nia snickered. She reached inside with terrifying precision. Without an eyepiece, without a magnifying lamp, her slender fingers guided the thin tweezers straight between the primary balance wheel and the hairspring cage. Minjun stepped toward her fast, intending to pull her away from the multi-million-dollar masterpiece, but he stopped dead in his tracks. Click. A tiny, delicate metallic snap echoed through the sterile room. For 3 seconds, absolute silence held the air. Then, deep within the dark obsidian body of the clock, a heavy steel weight dropped 2 millimeters. A series of ancient brass wheels began to whir, sliding along their arbors with smooth, buttery motion. The primary balance wheel gave a long, confident swing, and the heavy pendulum swung wide to the left. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The entire room seemed to vibrate with the deep, resonant rhythm of a heart that had been silent for over a century.
Minjun's Zutfrosen.
His jaw literally dropped by a fraction of an inch, a gesture so rare it practically broke his face. He looked from the swinging pendulum up to Nia's face. She was standing there, tweezers resting casually between her fingers, giving him a wide, completely unbothered grin that lit up the entire room. Told you, she whispered, leaning back against his work table like she hadn't just solved a century-old horological impossibility in 4 seconds. Brigitte was smart, but he was lazy with his arbors. Minjun slowly walked over to the clock, his eyes fixed on the moving gears inside. The complex mechanical ballet was executing perfectly, every tooth catching with flawless alignment. His mind was racing, trying to recalculate every single equation he had spent 3 years writing down in his leather journals. It defied his logic. It defied his order. He looked at her, really looked at her. How? He rasped out, his voice thick and rough. Nia smirked, taking a slow step toward him. Because he was so ridiculously tall, she had to tilt her chin up to meet his eyes, but she didn't give up an inch of ground. You watchmakers look at blueprints, Minjun. You think time is just math and dark suits. But machines have tension. You have to feel where the friction is before you try to force the gear. Minjun felt a strange, sudden heat hit his chest. A sudden spike in his own internal pulse that had absolutely nothing to do with precision mechanics. She was standing less than 6 inches away from him now. He could smell the subtle scent of warm vanilla, clean cotton, and faint motor oil coming off her skin. It was chaotic, loud, and completely out of place in his sterile sanctuary, and he found himself entirely unable to step back. You violated 3 safety protocols, he grunted, trying desperately to reassemble his usual icy composure, though his eyes dragged down to her mouth for a split second. And you owe me a coffee? She shot back, her amber eyes dancing with absolute amusement. A real one, not that burnt sludge you keep in the break room. I do not owe you anything. I just made your dead clock tick, mafia boss. The least you can do is buy me lunch before you go back to brooding in the dark. Minjun looked at the swinging pendulum, then back at the incredibly confident, beautiful woman standing in front of him. For the first time in 12 years, the master of time realized that his perfectly ordered world was about to be completely dismantled, gear by single gear. Over the next 3 weeks, the quiet workshop transformed into an absolute battleground of sharp wits, heavy tension, and an absurd amount of accidental touching. Minjun had tried to keep her restricted to archiving tasks, but it was completely useless. Nia had a habit of invading his workspace whenever she pleased, sitting on the corner of his heavy mahogany desk while he worked on high-complication wristwatches. She would hand him micro screwdrivers before he even asked for them, her fingers intentionally brushing against his warm, tattooed palm every single time. "You're leaning into my lighting," Minjun said one Tuesday afternoon, his ocular loop strapped to his eye as he worked on an ultra-thin platinum movement. "You have 6 overhead halogen lamps, Minjun," Nia said, swinging her legs off the desk while eating an apple with maximum noise. "If my arm is blocking your light, it's because you're sitting way too close to me. This is my bench, and I'm your assistant. You are an intern," he corrected, turning his face toward her. Because she was sitting on the edge of the desk and he was sitting in his low leather chair, their faces ended up directly at eye level. Nia stopped chewing. Her eyes dropped down to his dark, full lips, then up to his sharp gray-black eyes. "If I'm just an intern, why do you check the security cameras every time I walk down the hallway?" Minjun's hand stilled over the open movement. "I am checking for security breaches, right? Because the Brooklyn Navy Yard is sending stealth ninjas to steal your tweezers." She leaned forward, resting her forearms on her knees, bringing her face even closer. "Admit it, you like having me here. It breaks up your boring, brooding routine." "You are loud," Minjun said softly, his voice dropping into that quiet, deep register that made her stomach do a sudden flip. "You leave coffee rings on my leather mats. You play terrible music on your phone when you think I am not listening. And you touch gears without wearing gloves. And yet," Nia whispered, her eyes locking onto his with absolute daring, "your heart rate goes up every time I stand behind your chair." Minjun didn't deny it. He couldn't. His hand reached up, slowly removing the optical loop from his eye and setting it on the velvet pad. His dark eyes were completely exposed now, intense, hungry, and dangerously focused. "You think you know how machines work, Nia?" he murmured, his broad shoulders shifting as he stood up from his chair. He loomed over her, his massive frame blocking out the overhead halogen lamps completely, casting her in his shadow. "But human bodies are not made of brass and steel. They do not have safety release valves." Nia's breath hitched slightly, but she refused to back down. She tilted her head up, her pulse thumping visibly against the brown skin of her throat. "Then show me how you work, boss. Stop hiding behind your tools." Minjun took a single step closer, his thigh brushing against her knees. He raised his right hand, his long, warm fingers gently tracing the line of her jawline, his thumb resting softly near the corner of her lower lip. His dragon tattoo seemed to pulse under the warm skin of his arm. "If I step past this line," he warned softly, his thumb pressing lightly against her lip, feeling the soft heat of her breath. "There is no manual to fix what happens next." "Good," Nia breathed, her hands coming up to rest against his broad chest, feeling the thick, iron-hard muscle under his silk shirt. "I hate manuals anyway." Minjun's restraint snapped like an overwound mainspring. His massive hands slid to the back of her neck, tangling his fingers into her soft curls, and he pulled her mouth up to his in a deep, explosive, devastating kiss. Nia let out a soft gasp against his lips, her arms immediately wrapping around his thick neck, pulling herself flush against his towering frame. Minjun groaned into her mouth, his other arm wrapping tightly around her waist, lifting her right off the edge of the desk until she was wrapped around him. The kiss wasn't slow, and it certainly wasn't timid. It was 3 weeks of built-up friction, teasing comments, and unspoken obsession finally exploding into reality. He carried her 3 steps back, pressing her back against the heavy wooden frame of the central pendulum clock. The deep, steady tick-tock of the Brigitte movement vibrated through the wood behind her, matching the wild, frantic rhythm of their combined heartbeats. His lips dragged down her jaw, pressing hot, heavy kisses against her sensitive neck, making her arch her back as a wave of intense pleasure rushed through her entire body. "Minjun!" she gasped, her nails digging into his muscular shoulders through his dark silk shirt. You're gonna throw off the pendulum alignment. Let it break," he growled against her skin, his hands sliding down her back, clutching her tight against his hips. "Let the whole world stop ticking." He captured her lips again, deeper this time, his tongue claiming her mouth with an absolute possessiveness that left her completely breathless. Nia tangled her fingers in his dark hair, pulling him closer, kissing him back with the same fierce, hungry energy. Every single touch of his large, warm hands felt like a fire hitting dry wood. He was strong, massive, and incredibly intense, yet the way he held her frame was fiercely protective and incredibly precise. Just as Minjun's hand began to slip beneath the hem of her crop top, tracing the smooth skin of her ribs, a loud, sharp electronic buzzer rang out through the workshop ceiling. Beep, beep, beep. The secondary security alarm had tripped on the upper floor. Minjun pulled his face back instantly, his dark eyes wide and wild, his heavy chest rising and falling in rapid, jagged breaths. He looked down at Nia, her lips swollen, her hair beautifully messy, her chest heaving as she stared up at him in absolute dazed shock. They both stood there for 3 seconds, trying to regain control of their lungs while the alarm continued to blare upstairs. Minjun rested his forehead against hers, taking a long, shuddering breath of her vanilla scent. "My security team just breached the perimeter entrance," he rasped, his voice rough and completely wrecked. Nia let out a breathless, hysterical laugh, resting her hands against his pounding chest. "Your timing is absolute garbage, mafia boss. I will fix the security system," he growled softly, giving her lips one last, fierce, lingering kiss that made her knees feel like water. "And then I am taking you upstairs. If you are absolutely loving this high-intensity chemistry and the wild clash between this giant Korean boss and his brilliant black queen, do not let this moment slip away. Take 1 second right now to smash the like button, subscribe to StoryRealm Hub, leave a comment saying TikTok down below, and share this video with your friends. Your support keeps these daily stories alive." Minjun reluctantly set her down on her feet, adjusting his silk shirt with hands that actually held a slight, noticeable tremor, something that had never happened in his entire life. He checked his wrist chronometer, his cold, professional demeanor attempting to slide back into place, though his eyes remained dark and fixed on her face. "Stay in the workshop," he commanded softly. "Lock the secondary bolt from the inside. I will clear the estate team upstairs and return in 10 minutes. Take your time, boss," Nia smirked, leaning back against the work table and catching her breath while adjusting her top. "I'll just sit here and make sure your clocks don't faint from jealousy." Minjun gave her one last long, possessive look, then turned and walked fast toward the heavy iron exit door, his tall frame disappearing into the hallway leading up to the main estate entrance. Nia stood alone in the quiet workshop, the pendulum clock behind her continuing its steady, rhythmic swing. She touched her swollen lips with her fingers, a wide, thrilled smile spreading across her face. "Man," she whispered to the empty room, "horology is way more intense than I thought." She turned around to look at the Breguet clock. The pendulum was still moving smoothly, but as her sharp eyes scanned the lower casing, she noticed a small silver keyhole hidden beneath the main weight housing. A keyhole that hadn't been visible until the gears shifted into motion earlier that week. Curiosity getting the absolute best of her, Nia grabbed a small tension pick from her jacket pocket. 10 minutes is plenty of time, she muttered to herself with a grin. She knelt down beside the obsidian base, inserting the pick into the ancient lock mechanism. With 3 gentle twists of her wrist, feeling the delicate tumblers click into alignment, the hidden panel swung open with a soft metallic hiss. Inside lay a heavy, brass-bound velvet box. Nia pulled the box out carefully, setting it onto the main work table. She opened the latch. Inside was not an ancient gear or a priceless jewel. It was a complete set of detailed hand-drawn blueprints for a new, revolutionary escapement design, dated just 3 months ago, along with a small leather notebook filled with Minjun's sharp, elegant handwriting. On the very first page of the notebook, written in bold black ink, were 4 simple words: Project Nia, the unbreakable lock. Nia froze, her breath caught in her throat. She looked at the blueprints. The intricate mechanical design didn't feature traditional Swiss levers or standard gear ratios. It was a custom-engineered escapement built around a unique 2-stage balance system, a design that literally required 2 distinct, perfectly matched human touches to remain in balance. He had spent the last 3 months designing a clock that could only be assembled, maintained, and unlocked by her hands alongside his. He hadn't just been brooding in the dark for 3 years. He had been waiting for someone who understood his language, someone who could match his precision without being broken by his cold exterior. The heavy workshop door clicked open. Minjun walked back into the room, having cleared the false alarm upstairs. He stopped short when he saw her standing by his work table, the velvet box open, his personal notebook sitting under the bright halogen lamp. He stood still, his broad shoulders tensing slightly, his gray-black eyes watching her face with a quiet, uncharacteristic vulnerability. "You broke another lock," he said quietly, his voice low and steady. Nia looked up from the notebook, her amber eyes shining with a deep, powerful warmth that completely erased the lingering banter between them. She walked slowly across the polished terrazzo floor, stopping right in front of his massive frame. "You're an absolute idiot, Minjun," she whispered softly, her hand coming up to touch his chest, feeling his heart beating steadily beneath his black shirt. "You built a clock for me?" Minjun looked down at her, his eyes softening completely. He raised his hand, wrapping his large fingers over hers against his chest. "I built a sanctuary to keep the world out," he murmured, his deep voice thick with emotion, "because I thought everything outside was chaotic and broken. But then you walked in with your dirty sneakers and your brass tweezers, and you showed me that the chaos was the only thing making the clock worth winding." Nia smiled, a soft, genuine, breathtaking smile that reached every corner of her eyes. "So what happens now, boss? Do we assemble this thing? Or are you going to stand there pretending you don't want to kiss me again?" Minjun didn't say a word. He simply reached down, scooped her up into his arms, and carried her straight toward the private living quarters behind the main workshop wall. The Pendleton Grand Complication ticked steadily in the center of the room, its gears turning in flawless, mechanical harmony. But for the reclusive clockmaker and the brilliant girl who cracked his secret, time was no longer something to be measured in seconds, minutes, or hours. It was simply the beginning of everything. Thank you so much for joining us for another breathtaking journey today on Story Realm Hub. We bring you brand new, addictively gripping, and deeply passionate cinematic stories every single day. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on all notifications so you never miss a moment of the magic.